I follow a whole lot of nostalgia pages on Instagram. There's No Context Nostalgia or No Con Nostalgia, and then there's a couple other ones that have like 80s and 90s in the tags, and they just compile a list of things from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s for kids and adults that just made up of, they were cultural staples at one point, cultural icons, everything from food to technology to entertainment, so on and so forth. And it has all gotten me thinking how drastically the world has changed, even since I was growing up, and even when I was a teenager just a couple of years ago. You know, I was a teenager in the 2010s, or a young adult in the 2010s. I was a teenager in the mid-2000s, and then I was a kid in the early 2000s, in the late 90s. And it has changed. I've seen a lot of change over the 31 years that I've been alive as of the recording of this video. There's been a whole lot of change. Human attitudes have remained the same in general. People are still insanely tribal. People still find ways to divide instead of unite. Sin is still a really big issue, as it always will be. I believe that as a Christian. That's sort of an aside, but it is what it is. A lot of stuff has not changed, but a lot of stuff has. A lot of attitudes have changed. A lot of people have tried to force certain attitudes onto the culture. This whole cultural Marxism, wokeism, that has been a blanket over our culture for well over a decade now. People have been trying to force diversity, equity, and inclusion, and force conversations about that through every channel that they can get a hold of. And it's gotten tiring. But you're not crazy for pointing it out. You're not crazy for noticing that things in many ways used to be better. It's not just you were a child, because you will hear that from a lot of people. They'll say, well, you were just a rose-tinted glasses child. You didn't understand how the world works. And it's true. Many of us were young in the late 90s, early 2000s, and earlier, and we didn't fully understand how the world works, but we knew that human beings were, generally speaking, kind of scummy. We knew when big problems arise, even if parents had to explain it to us, bad stuff still happened, but people are focusing on when the good times were really good. There were certain people who were alive in people's families who aren't anymore. Are you gonna honestly tell those people that it's better that those people are dead today? No, it's not. It's very sad. It's very heartbreaking. It's a natural occurrence of life, but people miss their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, whoever they've lost, whoever has died in their life since then. That's a major change. Life is filled with change. Every generation has experienced multiple changes, but my generation, people born in 92 or in the late 80s, the early 90s, we've seen a lot. The early 2000s was crazy because it was just a blending of culture, unlike what other generations had experienced. Technology was at a level that was unprecedented. Consumer electronics and computers. It was amazing. It really was. And now it's been condensed down into nothing. One thing I notice when I look at these pages is I think, look at how much material stuff that we used to have that we don't anymore, because we don't need half of it, because half of it was cheap consumer electronics that some of them worked good, some of them not so much, some of them were just gimmicky things that they tried to get kids to buy, others were, just something that was more convenient. There's a lot of stuff with camera technology, and now we all have phones with cameras built into them, so there are still professional grade cameras that are hundreds of dollars, but nothing has film. Everything's digital. You can still get film cameras, but good luck finding places to develop them. You have to develop it yourself. It's a hobby at this point. Physical media has all but disappeared, even though there's still a market for it. It's starting to see a resurgence because people are tired of not actually owning good media that they like and being able to preserve it, so there's a market for that. But don't tell Hollywood, the mainstream entertainment industry. I mean, things have absolutely changed, for sure. And I've talked about this multiple times. I've made multiple videos talking about nostalgia, because for the past year and a half, I've been stuck on it because things have changed so drastically, and they've gotten so much worse, and it's such a headache. It is really a massive headache. because you want to try to explore new things and enjoy new things, but everything new is pushing cultural Marxism, wokeism, or starting some sort of debate or discussion about politics and climate change and all this bullcrap. Stuff that I don't want to talk about in general. I want to talk about the good merits of good entertainment. You can't anymore because entertainment has to remind you that we need to change, we need to fix climate change, we need to elevate women and people of color and people who aren't straight and all of these other things. They want to have all these conversations that I, the audience member, don't care to have because I'm not coming to your movie, your television show, your comic book, your video game to have those conversations to begin with. And back in the day, those conversations were rare. I'm not saying they didn't happen because there's some people saying, oh, we didn't have those conversations. Go watch Daria. Daria was pretty quote unquote progressive for its time at certain points, but it wasn't dominated by that. It was just certain moments. And it's probably why the show wasn't very well received back in the day by a lot of people. It was successful, but a lot of people just looked at it and they rolled their eyes. Much like they might today with some of the more overly progressive quote unquote media. You can't sit there and tell people things haven't changed. They're not crazy. That's just gaslighting people into misremembering something. And yes, we do misremember things from our past. Some things were better as a kid than they are as adults. That is a very real phenomenon. But it doesn't apply to every single memory and experience that we had. A lot of people say, well, you just miss being a kid. No, I don't miss being a kid, frankly. I want to be perfectly clear about something. I had a great childhood. But I enjoy the freedom and ability to choose as an adult that I didn't have as a kid. The number one thing that pissed me off about being a kid, there were two things. Having to submit to constant authority around you. Not having any agency. The most I could do, I could hardly pick my clothes as a kid. The most I could do is pick what I wanted to eat at certain times, and then other times I had to eat what was given to me. Now I can eat whatever the heck I want. I can wear whatever the heck I want. I can go wherever I want. I can do whatever I want within reason and within ability. I couldn't do that as a child, and I was constantly bored. I've got so many things from my childhood, from video games to books to old toys, as a reminder of a time when I used to be so insanely bored because we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and on the few occasions where we were home for days at a time, it got boring. I was homeschooled, so I was home more often than most other people. I wasn't going out and doing a whole lot other than going shopping, going to stores, and most places were 40 minutes away, a half hour away, because we lived out in the middle of nowhere. We didn't live 15 or so minutes away from major places to go other than maybe video rental stores. That's why video rental stores are special to me, because it was the ability to watch something that you hadn't seen before, because at one point you'd seen everything that was on TV. You had been to every website you were allowed to go on, and they were just boring back in the old days. I miss the old internet. The old internet was so clunky and weird, and I don't miss dial-up. I don't think anybody misses dial-up. It's just a funny memory, but I miss the way that websites used to be. They had a weird clunkiness to them, but when they worked, they were fun. There's a lot of tie-in websites for television networks and for different things. It was great. And they were really pushing the internet back then, but social media changed the entire internet landscape. It made it so that websites are pretty much obsolete. We need websites again. We need dedicated websites. It's not that nowhere has dedicated websites, but they're more often than not just basic information and links to social media. The social media dominance needs to end. We need to go back to websites and forums and start breaking things up again. We're too interconnected, and it's shrunk the world. There's no sense of adventure because the world now feels a lot smaller than it used to, because you can interact with people from all over. And it's kind of mundane now. But the thing is that we did used to have a more colorful culture, and some of it was corporate consumerism. A lot of it was. But here's the thing. Companies sold junk, but they also sold things that were cool. When you go to any of those nostalgia pages on Instagram, you'll see multiple opinions from people about certain food products and consumer electronics and toys and media products, and sharing their different memories. And it makes you think of what you were doing at that time and your relationship to that sort of thing. And it was good. It was fun. it felt like there was more to do, more to talk about that wasn't based on politics and all these different culture war battles and the current state of the economy and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, back in the day, there was geopolitical stuff going on that adults talked about. Mostly adults. I was surrounded by adults for most of my life, more so than kids at many instances. Never once did they talk about the geopolitical situation unless it was something major like 9/11 or the Iraq-Afghanistan wars, or like nobody talked about the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. It just kind of happened. 9/11 was more significant a memory than the space shuttle. It just, people weren't really talking about it. Some people didn't even know what was going on. There was a level of ignorance that people could have that made them, I think, more peaceful in many ways. Oh, sure, there were still problems. There were still people who, they partied, they got blackout drunk, people abused drugs, and they abused their spouses, and all of the same types of problems that you would see today still existed back in the day. But you've always got somebody, when a nostalgic page posts something and somebody goes, I miss those days, there's always one jerk in the comment section that goes, oh, those old days of racism and sexism and misogyny, and man, they certainly were great. And it's clear that either A, they weren't alive during that time, and if they claim they were, they're pretty much lying almost every time. Or B, they're so sucked into the modern day culture war and zeitgeist that they can't see anything outside of the lens of their own cultural Marxism. And it's stupid, because they look at the past with nothing but bitterness and condemnation. Whereas I look at the past as somebody who history helped get them through school, and I admire it. I admire the good parts of history, and I learn from the bad parts of history, and it's just a reminder that humanity is still at its core flawed and corrupt. But in the past, I look at the architecture, I look at the way that businesses used to be structured, I looked at the products that used to come out and the way that entertainment used to be structured, and they did so much right. Even when there was bad stuff, there was so much right. And nowadays, today, there's hardly any effort. There's hardly any creative effort. You know, you look at, one big thing is architecture. As the decades have gone on, architecture has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Part of it is because of the economy, because of money. They don't have money to really just experiment and go all out. Another thing is, too, these modern designers have no style. None. They're not influenced by classic stuff. They'll say they are, but their products clearly indicate that they're not. They're into something that looks stupid. It doesn't even look cool and space age the way that things used to look. Modern architecture just looks flat and boring and postmodern. It's just dumb. Just dumb. And it's not like there hasn't been bad architecture in the past. I want to be very clear. But today's, like, I was taking a train trip up to New England just a few weeks ago, and we went around New York. Or we went through New York, technically. And the urban sprawl, and just seeing all the old buildings was cool, but the new buildings popping up were just so ugly. They were so ugly. Mostly just glass structures that just terrible. They look like giant mirrors popping up everywhere. And it just, I don't know if that's a comment on the vanity of our culture or what, but it's just so ugly. I have nothing kind to say about New York, so I'll probably stop talking about it right here. I don't care. There was a time I wanted to visit, but I wouldn't step off of a train or off of a car. It's just straight through. Just straight through. New York is dead as far as I'm concerned. Saw a video of New York from 1978 that was posted on YouTube. That was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. And seeing some of the old-timers reminisce. Saw the Twin Towers when they were still up and an eerie shot of a plane going over them. It was just, woof. Statue of Liberty with the light up torch. I don't know if it still lights up anymore. I've heard some people say it does. Some people say it doesn't. I don't know. But the city looked cleaner. The cars were still a little bit bigger because they were having some cars from the 60s. And the cars were starting to transition into being smaller. You know, it was less densely populated. Once everybody descends on a city, and it's just multiple groups of people all with their own intentions, it becomes packed like sardines, and it suffocates people, and it suffocates the cities, and people don't want to be in it anymore. Cities used to be reasonably well populated. Now they're kind of overpopulated, and that's part of the problem. That's why I prefer to live in the suburbs or the flat-out country. I grew up in the country. Like I said, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So I don't touch cities with a 10-foot pole, any of them. I really don't. I only go through them, or I only visit them for business and go to the business districts, which are the safest parts. Everything else is just depressing. Because you've got people, and you've got some people who've lived there for generations, and they're packed into sardine cans. They remember when Like, the coolest thing about the show Hey Arnold is the neighborhood they grew up with is like a country neighborhood within a city. I think that's one of the coolest things. The city was built up around what used to be more like a country lane on the outskirts of a city. And that's really cool. But it feels like a country neighborhood within an urban setting. And I'm like, that's the only way that I would live in a city. I wouldn't live in a city today where it's just packed in like sardines and you don't know who your neighbors are, you don't know what their intentions are, and there's just too many people everywhere. But a neighborhood like the one in Hey Arnold, where everybody knows each other and you see local businesses, not these massive conglomerates everywhere, but just local fruit businesses, flower businesses, delis. That's great. That's what cities like New York used to be. And now it's all changed. Now it's all gotten corporate. The corporatization has gotten worse than ever before. There was a time when people loved corporations. They shouldn't have. But corporations presented themselves much better, and they had reliable products, and they guaranteed customers for life. Nowadays, corporations couldn't give a crap less. They're beholden to shareholders, not to customers. And that has shifted the whole dynamic of their products, how they treat their workforce, how they pay their workforce. They become shareholder and profit-driven beyond reasonability, and many of them are conglomerating together, they're merging together, and then they fold because they're too big. Because the customers just say they've had enough, they walk away, and then they go bankrupt. Or they ask for bailouts from the government. Some of them get them, some of them don't. But things have changed, ladies and gentlemen. If you were alive from any point in the 20th century to now, things have absolutely changed. The 2010s was one of the biggest cultural shifts the United States and I think the world has ever seen culturally. Because people's attitudes completely changed on certain things. Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to care more about race than we should. We're starting to care more about gender than we should. We're starting to care more about sexuality than we should. Instead of just living as these people and as these lifestyles, we're starting to over-care about these things and over-represent these things to the point where if you point it out, you're suddenly an evil person. Even though you're not an evil person, you're just pointing out that there's too much focus being put on people's arbitrary traits as opposed to their individual characters. Individuality is being systematically erased. If anything is being systematically done, it's the erasure of independence. It's all about groups. It's all about conglomerates. You're either politically on the left or the right, or you're somewhere in between, but you're a part of some group. You're not an individual anymore. And once we lose our individuality, we lose our humanity, because good groups happen when individuals willingly choose to come together. When individuals who have different thoughts and opinions and ideas are willing to peacefully debate those ideas and come together for a common goal. The coming together for a common goal doesn't happen because people are so at each other's freaking throats thanks to social media. The social media thing has changed everything. Do I think social media should be shut down? No, but I think people should use it less, and they're starting to. Sites like Facebook have almost no capital anymore. Almost everybody has something negative to say about Facebook, except for people who are older, because it helps connect family and friends. That's what it's useful for. Outside of that, it's useless. Same with Instagram, same with Twitter. YouTube, if you want to consider YouTube a social media, is probably one of the only useful ones because people are able to share their creativity, but that's starting to change too. YouTube is starting to clamp down on what is allowed on its platform, and they have been for years. And so now you got content creators moving to Odyssey and Rumble and finding whatever alternatives that they hear of popping up because they still want to just be creatively free. Our culture is moving away from individuality, and they're starting to corral people, and that makes people easier to control by controlling forces, governments, corporations, whatever the case might be. So things have changed, and you're not crazy for pointing that out. You're not crazy for saying, I miss the old days, because I do too. It's sad that none of us can go back. It's sad that time machines don't exist, so we can't re-experience them, in some cases with fresh eyes as an adult. But that's how it always has been, and that's how it always works. So what do? What on earth do any of us do? You know, you don't want to be stuck in the past, right? Because as good as the past was, you really can't go back. Stick to your principles. Don't waver. If you're an old-fashioned person, be proud of it. If you've got traditional principles that your parents were raised on, that your grandparents were raised on down the line, don't be ashamed of them. Don't let modern people browbeat you over the head for doing things old-fashioned. In many ways, you're smarter than them for doing that. They're going into a blind future, rudderless. You have some grounding. If you have faith in the Lord, if you've got traditional values, you're going to go a lot farther than most people, because you're going to be making decisions the old-fashioned way, the critical thinking way. You're not trying to be perfect, but at the very least, you've got a moral compass, and a moral compass is severely lacking in a lot of today's culture. There's nothing wrong with having a moral compass. A lot of people will accuse people who have a moral compass of being hypocrites, but in many cases, it's just not true. Yes, everybody's a hypocrite in one way or another. Nobody is perfectly consistent. But it's often used as an excuse for people who are trying to do something good or trying to do something moral. And the people who tend to go away from that or criticize them for having a moral compass, because that's not popular in the 2020s. It's more popular to just do whatever you want and to be entitled to whatever you feel. I don't live that way. I was never raised that way. And if I had kids, I wouldn't be raising them to think that way. And I know a lot of parents who are trying not to, but they're going against the grain with all the parents who just want to give their kids the world, who just think that their kids are all baby Einsteins. And I started to see that crap when I was a kid. This whole new wave of parenting, because, the old generation of parents were so bad and they were all abusive and terrible. Even if they weren't physically abusive, they were mentally and verbally abusive. Everybody's a victim. Everybody's a victim now. And people are getting sick of the victimhood on parade. At some point, you need to man up or woman up and just get over it and just grow. You will carry scars for the rest of your life. They're there to make you stronger. I'm sorry if anything genuinely bad has happened to you, but at the end of the day, as a human being, to keep living, you need to heal. You need to move forward. You don't need to wallow in victimhood and get together with other victimhood or other victims and just demand better treatment. You need to just be a better person. The world isn't going to respect you by virtue of things that have happened to you. The world will respect you when you do good things and be a good person. That takes work. This idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. People say, well, you can't do it anymore because the economy is bad and this, that, and the other. Doesn't mean you can't still work hard and achieve things. Of course you can. It's a lot harder than it used to be. But keep in mind, it used to be a lot harder even years ago. There was a brief period of prosperity, but look back at the Great Depression. You couldn't buy a house during the Great Depression. People were losing their homes. People were losing their property. They were losing their family members. They were losing everything. But yet hardworking people survived because they produced things of worth and of value. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. They learned what they needed to learn. They did what they needed to do. They didn't complain. They just kept going. But our attitude now is, I don't want to do anything. I'm a wage slave. I shouldn't have to pay my rent because my landlord's a tyrant. I shouldn't have to do this because it's slavery. That's the mentality today, is just, I shouldn't have to do what my ancestors have done for generations because I think I'm morally and mentally superior to them. There's no respect for the past. The past is only bad people who did bad things. Imagine people saying the same thing about our generations in the future if they read about us in the history texts, whether those be books or something digital. Just imagine how insulted you would be by that. Because it's just not true. Humanity is more complex than that. We've seen, for every benevolent Mother Teresa, there is a Hitler. Plain and simple. That's how history is. There's good, there's bad, there's everything in between. So if you look at the past with contempt and say that they were doing everything wrong because they didn't know what we know now, or they, whatever, they were idiots. Without them, you don't exist. Without your predecessors, you don't exist. So you better be willing to learn. If you know old people, if you've got older grandparents, take in their wisdom. That's what I used to do as a kid. I used to take in my grandfather's wisdom. I loved my grandfather. I miss him every day. Take in their wisdom. He wasn't a perfect man. He was a flawed man. But he loved his family, and he had life experience. He didn't always have the most politically correct opinions, which was hilarious, but he was an old-fashioned, hard-working man who sacrificed a lot, and he lived in a lot of pain in his last couple of years. He was a wonderful man. I love him to death. You got to appreciate what past generations have been through, because we're supposed to be learning from them. We're supposed to be learning from those who came before us, because it'll be our turn to inherit the responsibility. The older we get, the more we inherit from those who came before us. We take their role. That's how each generation works. And the only way you do that is by learning from those who came before you. It's the only way that gets done. So no, you're not crazy. The world has gotten worse, but we can survive it, okay? We can survive it. Embrace tradition, reject modernity. Don't reject all of modernity, because there are some modern inventions and things that are good, but embrace traditional values. They've persisted over hundreds of years for a reason. Learn from the past and learn how to navigate the future by your understanding of the past. Don't just look at the past with judgmental eyes. Don't just look onto people in the past with eyes of scorn and a holier-than-thou attitude. That's not healthy. It's disrespectful. They worked hard to make sure that you have something better. And yes, I understand many of them screwed up. Our economy is screwed up because of what a lot of people did in the past. But it's going to be up to us to try and fix it. If there's a second Great Depression, we'll have to learn from the first how they survived. That's the only way we'll do it. Anyways, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I've rambled for long enough. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.